Good afternoon and most welcome to H756. And today we're going to make justice to the H. We haven't talked about this person for a long time, and it's about time to reconsider him and sort of uncover him. This is Martin Heidegger, the great German philosopher. And I will today take up some of the terms of Heidegger. And he's famous of being very complicated because he has a completely new inventory with words. And the trick to understand them is abstain from translating them into ordinary, what he calls ontic language. What one needs to do instead is to do them. And the more you do them, the more you're able to use them. So its language is use. And what he wants to construct is a language that can reveal the ontology of reality. It's a grand project. I will not go through all the terms, that wouldn't make any sense, but I think there are actually two couple of terms that do have a special position, and they could actually be slightly misinterpreted by me now to make it easier to slid into Heidegger's thinking. And those terms are Aletheia and Theia, Zuhanden and Verhanden, vorhanden, or Zuhandenheit and Vorhandenheit. And now I'm going to translate those terms we're not supposed to do, so we need to put what I'm saying now in parentheses to disregard it afterwards. But I think it could be actually helpful, because misunderstanding, according to Heidegger himself, is actually a sort of understanding. I have done this graphic of the whole thing. So you can see these two spheres as Thea, and this is the actual uncovering. And one could say, and now I'm using my terms, ignore them afterwards, don't remember them, but this could be said to be argument against foundationalism. What is foundationalism? Well, that's the ontic thinking, that there is a foundation of reality. It's coming from somewhere, and it has a departing point in time. You could also term that radical embodiment, that I, as a subject, construct reality in this moment, in this place. And then the third rephrasal done by me personally as lecturer today, is it is not a point from nowhere or a point from nowhere. They are pronounced the same, and I make a point there, nowhere, nowhere, almost the same, well, the same. And that's our logocentrism, where we take a stand from nowhere and nowhere, everywhere and nowhere at the same time. What he means is everything starts in this position that you are. And that wouldn't be a point from nowhere. You could call this a process model of reality, that it takes two substances or two things, one being a substance and the other one not being a substance, non-substance. And in between the cutting line between the two spheres, remember your geometry, that is the claro. This is where it happens. Heidegger refers to this as the Lichtung, reality. And now he completely avoided the idea of a permanent reality seen from nowhere or nowhere. Instead, we have a happening that is verbal. Reality is a movement, and it's made up of two different things, and it shows itself. This is what Heidegger calls presencing. It's common to forth. And this is, of course, very, very interesting turn of events. Now existence is a doing, and permanence could be said to be a more refined or articulated doing. And now it's not uninteresting or to be ignored what you think yourself. What your perspective is as a seer in a point of time, in a point of reality, is important. Usually, especially after the 19th century, we are encouraged to take a point from nowhere. When we think about something, people ask you, are you objective now? If you do something outside of quantum physics, people would say, we need the objective view. It should not be only you who thinks that. It should be the objective view. Point from nowhere. This is what Heidegger wants to avoid. And actually, this coincides precisely with quantum physics. Because in quantum physics, what you think, your beliefs are part of the equations. And that's the only place outside Heideggerian philosophy where you can find an equivalent. Elsewhere, you're always encouraged not to say what you think, not to tell your own perspective, not include your own belief system, but here, instead, you are supposed to. It will not be a Lichtung. It will not be reality if you are not included in every part of your existence. Your likings, your preferences, your dislikings, your embodiment, if you're tall, if you're short, whatever you are comes into the fore. It is part of presencing. It's not to be ignored. And I think this could actually be a starting point in beginning to understand Heideggerian thinking. Otherwise you would strand into, I was very kindly handed a copy by my colleague Kalle Lundahl here about 3 types of Vorhandenheit. And already at the start I became suspicious. 3 types of Vorhandenheit? And then I saw the mentioning of cognitive Vorhandenheit. And all of a sudden, the vocabulary of Heidegger is immensely molested. It's hurt. Cognitive is one of those things he really wants to avoid, because that gives association of a permanent outside from nowhere. So it's not starting good, but it's a good example that reality is actually consisting of what is wrong, what is false. That is an active ingredient. He does have share that view with Derrida and Deleuze, for instance, but it's a very odd view in personal, for me personally, I would say it's commonly also a very unusual view. I think the usual view is that you can't learn anything from what's false, and it's not taking part of reality. But you see here, what is true is not part of reality either. It helps to participate in the process of reality, but it's not the substance of reality. And here all of a sudden one understands why the difficult terminology of Heidegger, why all these 50 different terms, there are even more. Well, to show you a possible simplification, because all of a sudden we just have this space. We don't need 50, 200 or thousands of expressions we usually handle when we do those things. And this is overspecification caused by we're not actually looking at what is at hand, zu handen. We can only understand zu handen if we understand Vorhandenheit. And Vorhandenheit is a little bit like preserving this to be the real stuff and ignoring what's in the middle. In Vorhandenheit, you have this, you have what's real, what's substantial, what is, well, usually permanence coming to this side, but I made a twist here to make a point. And on the other side, you have what's not permanent, what's false, and not substance. And in between these two things, there is nothing. And that's, of course, is in mathematics and logic the excluded middle. This is not supposed to exist. And this, Heidegger says, this is where everything happens. This is the good part. This is the nut in the almond in the rice porridge that we eat at Christmas. This is the juicy part. This is where it starts. This is the Lichtung. There is a good reason why he used these words. And to translate them, as these fellows did, to 3 different types of Vorhandenheit, and one is cognitive. That's of course diminishing of Heidegger to a point where he becomes like some sort of coffee shop philosopher stoned by drugs or something like that. That's not the true Heidegger. Heidegger does not agree with foundationalism, is not in concord with that ordinary thinking. It's part of his explanation though, and he also explained why it could be considered real, and that you as a person are maybe unaware of reality, but your body is not, because you are already thrown in. You are in reality whether you want it or not. So it's not really a question to explain reality, it's to help you understand what you are already in. It's, one could almost say, pedagogical help for us poor fellows who got stranded in the Vorhandenheit. And we every day, because we cling to substance, what is real, what is permanent, and what is the original, we get lost, because if we cling to this, we are bound up to accept this as well. And we have to jump between the two. This is something that we mentioned before with Bertrand Russell, changing opinion 22 times. And this is common among modern educated men. They change opinion constantly. This is where constantly happens. My professors did it. I've done it myself, for God's sake. This is the problem. If you want something a bit more meaty, and that is what Heidegger wanted, let's look how reality actually is for us, as it's present for us. Not a reality that is in front of us only, but a reality that's lived actually now, in this circumstance, where I'm standing now. when I'm talking now and taking in perspective who I am, what I like, that I'm drinking coffee, which I'm wearing these clothes, that I'm a bit thirsty, that is not to be excluded, because this is the lived presence. And I think this is so great because you can actually see it in front of you. He's helping us to understand what it's about. Think of a very dense forest. Chop down the trees. First, if you're 400, you will think, oh, I lost something. The trees are gone. What should I do now? There's nothing left. I'm stranded here with 2 bare hands. But another view will see that once you cut the trees down, you'll see other stuff that are actually covered by the trees. And I think it's an excellent example where we're staying now in Engvierna, because that's filled with very densely populated pine trees. They don't give much light to the underneath. And you will see there are no bushes, there are hardly any plantation growing underneath the pines. The only thing you can find is, if you're lucky, moss. So what the pine trees are doing, the evergreens are doing, is that they're blocking out the light. Even though they are substance, they don't allow for the other thing to come to fore. Chop the trees down and you get a Lichtung, kalhygge. And kalhygge is not a bad thing for a forest. And I can hear protests coming here from you saying, well, kalhygge, this is a modern thing. We haven't done that. Well, we started in the Neolithic time. This is a new thing. It needs humanity. That's not true, actually. When humans are not alone, we will have natural forest fires. It has always happened. That's actually part of the living tree's existence, to be burnt down. And I think it's one of the most interesting examples is actually from Australia. There you even have trees that are helping with this process. So if there is no one around to forget a cigarette butt or a match lit or forgetting his campfire, there will be trees that sets the bush on fire. They contain oils and they hand out the possibility of a fire just so they can reproduce, so they can live longer. And loads of those trees are actually surviving the fires. What the fires are taking away is just the outer sheath. So now maybe you understand the reason to chop it down. And in the chopping down you get reality. Whereas his contemporary philosophers and thinkers, they were grabbing onto this. What they thought was the real, the substance. And then you lose both this and this. You lose out on both. You don't get the other one. Nothing will be true if you say this is foundation. And that's a very dear price to pay, living in untruth. And that's a very permanent untruth. It's not like this untruth. Because in this case, you are trying to take a pose that's impossible, a pose from nowhere, and you become completely fake. If you don't bring your inner soul to reality, nothing will be true. You can't say a single true word. Every thought will be false. And that's a rather hefty price to pay. And let me half quote something I read from Schrödinger. Schrödinger says that he became real first when he discovered that if he doesn't take his personal likings, his preferences, what actually made Schrödinger be Schrödinger and nobody else, he wouldn't be able to do quantum mechanics. And that's very interesting. Normally we think science is that you get into a state of Vorhandenheit. Well, not in quantum mechanics. I don't know if you do it in any science. You do it rarely. It's rarely happening. It's more of an idealization that is impossible. And to get stuck in that, that is when you don't take your own preference. And let me get you an example. In Japanese, when you hand in an essay, you have to show why you think the things you do, and you don't bring in references. Never. You have to say, this is my personal opinion. This is why I prove it with myself. And if you put in other things, that would be fake for them. That is lessening. That is when you get in here. Then you are taking this weird perspective from nowhere. And maybe in your head you think, oh, I make it more objective by taking in other people. I make a huge list of references. No, you don't. You are believing this point from nowhere. You need to take yourself into the picture. This is what Heidegger means. Become real. Bring you in. And they always use the phrase, I think, jag tycker. I perceive, I feel. In Japan, Korea, China. You can never use it is. Never. That would make you a fake. And that is amazing. And actually, Heidegger took some of his stuff. There is very great evidence. He took stuff from the East into his own philosophy. That was the starting point. And this idea is his help to us, to make us understand we need to bring ourselves into the action. And if it's not subjective, it's not worth anything. It's not something that you actually thought out yourself. It won't be worth the paper it's written on, or the air I'm warming up, or the tape recorder I'm taping this with now on the mobile. It has to come from you directly. It has to be your genuine thinking, something that you thought up, not that somebody else thought up, or you, this is even worse, if you got the idea from someone else. That would kill the whole thing. That is not your idea anymore. Well, you can learn from other people, but then you have to internalize it into you, make it yours, make it your personal thing, your life things. You need to put the meat, the heart into it. And it's the same as is it pointing to when you take this poem by Fichte, The Wanderer. I really like that one. Constantly think about it and how he walks home. And what makes it real is his personal experience, because he knows the road. He has a personal relationship to every stone, to every bush, and he feels hungry, he feels tired, all those things. And this is what Schrödinger means. It's not the same thing to do an experimentation in the morning when you are very, very up and jerky and clear, as doing in the afternoon when you're tired. That affects reality. That makes reality. It wouldn't be reality otherwise. But if the same all of your day, and you say it's going to be the same tomorrow as well, well, then it's not quantum mechanics anymore. And it's definitely not Heidegger. Then you're living in some fantasy from nowhere. And then your predictions will never, ever be true, because the world is just not like that. It never will be. We want it to be that way. That's one thing. Yes, it's true. And this is also that Heidegger acknowledged. We have this longing within our chest for the reality to be permanent, and we shouldn't be held responsible to be alive. And this is the idea of misconception of Das Man. When you blend into everything, then you are anonymous, you're faceless, you don't have any opinion. The opinions you have are the opinions of others. But he says Das Man is also an illusion, because participating in conventions with other people is actually part of reality as well. So Das Man is double-faced, something positive, something negative. it's actually the clearer, the Lichten of reality. You see, these things at sometimes, I wouldn't say always, they take a more principal part in understanding of the main philosophy. I shouldn't go too far to say it's always philosophy, not at all. But I think it actually could be a very good starting point in getting in to understand this huge difference. And Heidegger is the only philosopher that really does this to point. Merleau-Ponty copied him, but he made it his own philosophy, I'd say. But most other philosophers, they don't do that. They have the perspective from nowhere, and that's the gold standard for everything intellectual today. Become more and more, and I think that's not ideal. I think that's not the best, because it makes it unreal somehow. It makes it a copy, or and not a good copy. Then it's rather lousy imitation. Like we all grew up with these Hong Kong watches, and you see, what's bad with them was not that they were copies, because you know that. The bad thing was the person who made them didn't care about really copying. He did something just cheap, and that's a Hong Kong copy. And don't be a Hong Kong copy. Be your true self. Because only when you develop that, and that will take time to, it's not nothing you can do easily. And this is the metaphor with the wanderer. He comes home. He wouldn't come home, and this is also important, if he didn't have to walk the whole path. Because it need to be done egocentrically. Being put down by a helicopter wouldn't do the trick. So you see, reality puts a play here. Helicopters maybe don't exist at the time of Heidegger. But if you were to use that, you would actually lose reality. There are so many traps today that didn't exist at the time of Heidegger. It's harder to be genuine today, I would say. And it's also much harder to understand Heidegger. We are bound, there's greater risk of making mistakes. And I think Heidegger would be the first one to acknowledge that, because not all times are the same. And he had a very, very keen and clear understanding that his philosophy wouldn't be much use maybe in 150 to 200 years. And that's a very huge insight. He understands that he is in a specific time period. And that means it holds true now. But it's obviously still true what he says in this day, 2021, the last trembling 3 days of this year. It still holds true, and it can still give us a lot of help. And I hope this was helpful for you as well. Please do comment. I'll say a good afternoon to all of you, and thank you very much. Bye bye.
Thank you.